Um, Hi and welcome. This is episode 3 of a series of recorded presentations which ultimately aim to introduce you as the trainee ACCP to workplace-based assessments. These assessments are a requirement of your FICM training pathway, and therefore understanding them and how to use them is very important. This presentation will focus on the mini clinical evaluation exercise, which is also known commonly in practice as the Mini Cex. And the aim ultimately is to build confidence in yourself as a trainee ACCP to recognise assessment opportunities and what each assessment can be collated for. So a little bit of a disclaimer. So this work has mostly been underpinned by the National ACCP Induction Project, which found from surveying both qualified and trainee practitioners that only 25% of respondents were provided with a formal overview of how to use their logbook and what information was vital for their FICM paperwork, but also their ARCP process. So the purpose of these presentations is to ultimately demystify the paperwork process for you as a trainee and hopefully set you up for a very successful pathway. So in each academic year, you must collate a minimum number of workplace-based assessments, and this table can be found within your FICM paperwork. And for Mini Cexes, that is 2 assessments per academic year. So the ICM Mini Clinical Evaluation Exercise, also known as the Mini Cex. This type of assessment ultimately involves the assessor directly observing the trainee in a clinical scenario, and it will often cover a variety of curriculum areas, which may include, and not exclusive to, but history taking, physical examination, your communication skills, and particularly around your clinical judgment. Now, during your training, per academic year, you are only required to collect 2 of these assessments. However, like with the case-based discussions, I would highly recommend that you collate as many of these as you possibly can, because you need to be able to demonstrate clinical progression throughout your training, but also you need to be able to demonstrate competency. And these clinical evaluation exercises are excellent at developing you as an ACCP. So what is a Mini Cex? So they have ultimately been designed to evaluate the trainee in clinical practice, to assess their decision-making skills and how they interpret and apply evidence. And this is undertaken by the trainee being directly observed in practice for this assessment. So following this assessment process, there should be a discussion between you and your assessor surrounding the clinical case that you were presented with, and feedback should be provided to you. It is ultimately intended to assess the overall clinical conduct of the trainee, and there are 9 domains which are allocated to this when managing a single case, and I will go into those 9 domains in the next slide. But again, this is an excellent tool of assessing your ability to apply evidence and make decisions and interpret data within clinical practice. So, like with all paperwork, this assessment tool can be found on the FICM website, and the type of assessment can be found here. So this is your mini clinical evaluation exercise, and much like with your other piece of paperwork, this comes in a Word format, so I would highly recommend that you pre-populate your personal details, including your registration number as applicable. What it is asking you is it's asking you to outline the area that you were observed performing in practice. So this may be, for example, the stabilization and intubation of a patient. And then your code number, again, this directly maps to your curriculum. And again, when you come to the ARCP process at the end of your end of each academic year, filling out your code number and where this assessment tool maps to your curriculum is incredibly useful. So really get into the habit of mapping them early. You will then highlight which clinical environment this case occurred in, and they can happen over an array of clinical settings. And then general specific feedback can be provided to you from your assessor, and an action plan agreed. So the 9 domains can be found here. So the things that you are being assessed for during this assessment are surrounding your history taking and information gathering, your assessment and your presentation of differential diagnosis or your consideration of those, your immediate management and stabilisation of the patient, any further management and clinical judgment, identification of potential problems and difficulties, communication skills, so not just with the patient but with other staff in departments and colleagues, your record keeping, your overall clinical care, and your understanding of the issues surrounding the clinical focus chosen by the assessor. So essentially, you will be marked as either satisfactory or unsatisfactory in any of these domains. And if any of the domains come back as unsatisfactory, specific feedback within your further learning and experience should focus on, should be provided by the individual assessing you to help you build an ongoing development plan for your personal needs. So what areas can you collect Mini Cexes for? So again, this assessment is absolutely fantastic for mapping to multiple areas of your curriculum. And I have provided a list on the right hand side here, but this is not an exhaustive list of opportunities. They are just some of the areas that you could consider collating Mini Cexes for. So you could consider them for transfers, both inter and intra-hospital, for admissions to critical care, for breaking bad news to families, or next of kin's, relatives, the assessment and management of the deteriorating patient. These are quite broad, but there are so many areas that you could collect Mini Cexes for in terms of clinical cases and your examination of the patients, and the list really is endless. So who can support and assess a Mini Cex? So again, I feel to get the most out of these assessments, they should ultimately be assessed by somebody who is incredibly knowledgeable in the management of a critically ill patient, and the trainee should ask the assessor to observe the clinical encounter with the patient. So when you are being assessed in practice and your performance is being assessed, the assessor should ultimately be hands-off and should only become involved if they are required to. So if there is an episode where patient safety is potentially going to be compromised, or the overall help and management to stabilise that patient is required. And the individuals who can collate these assessments for you are again your consultant body, your registrar colleagues, and your qualified ACCPs. As I would say with any of these paperwork exercises, it is really important to understand the local requirements, and some areas would probably rather that you got a good number of consultants to assess you on some of these areas, along with registrars and qualified ACCPs. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you very much for joining me. This has been a whistle-stop tour of Mini Cexes. If you have any questions about any of the content, feel free to reach out to me on either Twitter or via my email address, and I will endeavour to come back to you, and thank you very much. So further episodes can be found on direct observational procedural skills, case-based discussions, acute care assessment tools, and your logbooks.